Today in the Reading Corner, we are really delighted to be talking to Christopher Corr, illustrator of The Great Race, which is just out from Francis Lincoln, but obviously an illustrator of many other books. So welcome, Christopher.
Thank you. Very pleased to be here.
I wondered today if we could start by exploring something of your journey in illustration. I'm interested to know, when you were growing up as a child, whether art was a particular interest or whether anybody recognised any innate talent.
Well, I've always loved drawing, and my mum was really encouraging for me to draw and paint, and we used to draw together sometimes. She really encouraged me to express myself through picture making. Books as well. Books. We always had lots of books growing up, and we made our own library in the corner. But for me, art was always my big thing.
Were any of those books illustrated books, and do you remember them?
I do. We had lots of picture books. I really like the Sajek, the Czech illustrator, his books of cities around the world. This is London, this is Hong Kong, this is New York. And I've still got them. They're fantastic books.
And they're finding a new audience because they've been reissued, which is great.
They still look great.
Yeah. And so when did you know that you were going to become an illustrator? I know you went to art college. Was it at that point, or tell us a bit more about the rest of the journey?
When I was at school, I had two really great art teachers, and they just encouraged me. I was going to study English, and I remember having a meeting with them one day, and they said, "Haven't you written enough essays? Haven't you read enough books now? Just it's drawing and painting that you like. Just apply to art school." And I had never thought about it at all, and it was one of those situations where it's very easy to not think about the thing you love most, really. So I applied to art school, and I did a foundation course at Manchester for 1 year, and it's just the most incredible experience, being able to draw and paint and print and take photos and all day long. It just was a dream. And then after that, I liked Manchester. I didn't know the city before I got there, and I decided to stay another 3 years and do my BA course in graphics. And all the time, drawing was the most important thing. There's so much to explore with drawing, and so many different ways to draw, and so many things to draw. And I was kind of building up my skills, I think. And then after 4 years, I still didn't feel ready. I wasn't sure about illustration. I didn't really know how I could do it. I applied to the Royal College for the illustration MA course. When I got in, which was an amazing achievement for me, it was a bit like going right back to the beginning again. And we had some great illustration tutors. Quentin Blake was the head of the department. They had lots of people coming in, showing their work from all kinds of areas of illustration. And I didn't, for me, I was kind of discovering the world at the time. I wasn't really thinking about children's books. I saw myself more like a journalist. I thought I want to go and see the world and draw the world. So I started travelling and applying for scholarships and using whatever money I could just to go somewhere and draw the place and get to know it in some sense.
Perhaps that's a good place for us to talk about some of those travels. I think anybody that's seen one of your books, there'll be an instant recognition from your wonderful use of colour, and they do seem to have an interest in other parts of the world. That seems to be a theme that comes through, including in the latest book, The Great Race. So were there any travels that informed that book?
Yeah, I went to China for about 4 months in, I think it was the summer of 89, and I didn't really know much about China. I read some books, I'd seen some films, I'd seen lots of photographs, but I was curious to see it through my own eyes, really. And so I took a flight to Hong Kong. I stayed in Hong Kong and explored the place for 4 days. It was in the middle of summer. It was very hot and sweaty. And then I took a boat to Shanghai, which took about 3 days. And I drew all the time. And it was all wonderful adventure, really.
And here in front of us, I can see a scrapbook that you made while you were travelling. Perhaps we can talk through some of these pages so that our listeners can get something of the richness of the sorts of things that you saw.
Yeah, when I travel, I always look for things I can collect, ephemera, things that are very much a part of that culture. So I collected lots of tickets, matchbox pictures and wonderful packaging, and they're full of Chinese symbols and legends and hero figures, and here's some firework packaging with dragons and magical birds that form part of their culture. And it was certainly a good way for me to get to understand the culture more. And it helped later on when I went on to work on the Great Race many years later. But I still use this book. It's a great resource for me.
And just at the page we've stopped at here, I notice we're looking at a train, and one of the things that strikes me is how different this is from the more traditional art that I've seen in some of the preceding pages. Yes.
When I was there, it was still very much kind of getting over the Mao days, really. I think this is a cigarette box I picked up in the street with a train on it, and this is from a toilet roll I found on a train, and it's got a big locomotive engine and whooshing into the future.
Was that on the actual paper?
It was on the wrapping. Oh. So when I travel, I'm ruthless. I peel things off walls. I ransack hotels. I found people selling matchboxes before they were made up. I was taken into fan factories sometimes, and I asked for samples. I found a man making calligraphy in the street, so I went down his bin and collected bits of paper he'd written on.
It looks as though the pages are themed, so is it something that built up? Did you start a page for like teas and then add to it? It looks as though you must have had...
I tried to have some system of organisation. So, this is a page of kind of lucky matchboxes with pagodas and 2 bats, lots of double happiness symbols, lucky coins. Yeah, it's full of really rich in symbolism.
And perhaps we could also have a look at this is collected, found art, if you like. Yes. And then you were drawing yourself. I understand that you didn't really take photographs, but you did lots of drawing. Could we just have a look in your sketchbook as well?
Yes, it was my camera, really. Every opportunity on trains, and I took bike rides through the countryside, and whenever I saw something good, I stopped and drew it. This is in the Li River in Guilin, and it was very rural countryside, people farming the land with buffalo and bamboo boats on the river, lots of bamboo. I had one green paint tube with me, so I used it, and I try to travel quite light when I'm out for the day. Street market, somebody selling fish. It was in the summer, so a lot of people spend their time sleeping. And even at night, it was surprising. In Beijing, people bring their beds out on the street and sleep on the street because it was so hot.
You're not drawing in pencil?
It's a little fibre pen. You get a much better line. This was a string bag of live frogs I saw in the market. Market's a bit like going to the zoo, full of shocks. And people were very relaxed about me drawing them. There was never any, apart from drawing trains at the station, that didn't go down too well. But in the street, I was fine.
So, years later, when you were doing the Great Race, you came back to have a look at some of this material.
Yes. And I wanted to include some of the things I'd seen in some of the places. And so I set the story in Guilin, in the Li River, with those wonderful limestone hills that everybody knows. They're very magical. It's a magical landscape, very traditionally Chinese, lots of pagodas and little temples on hillsides and waterfalls and steaming bamboo groves.
Just in case anybody doesn't know, we should say that the Great Race is the story of how the Chinese zodiac came to be, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And everybody knows the symbols. It's the year of the dog, it's the year of the horse. But it's a wonderful, wonderful story about trying to organise the great emperor, who's kind of a god figure. He's trying to organise get the universe back into some kind of order, because everything is chaotic. Everything's got out of line. So he organises a race for all the animals in the kingdom to take part in the race. And the first 12 to swim across the river, they become the kind of rulers of each year. So one per year. Some work together, others work alone. Some are like the pig and the dog. They're very playful, and they kind of lose track of what they're doing. Whereas other animals are more kind of ruthless in the way they get across, like the snake hides in a horse's hoof.
This year is the year of the dog. Do you know what year you are?
I am a goat.
Right, and I am a rat. I wonder if we could have a look at the book now. I asked you if you wouldn't mind bringing some, rather hesitantly I say, ask you if you wouldn't mind bringing some of your original artwork, because I didn't know whether there would be available any original artwork to look at, and you've arrived with this wonderful collection of paintings. I wonder if you would mind telling us a little bit about how you work, and maybe if we could have a look at a spread that you were particularly fond of or pleased with as a way into talking about that. That would be lovely.
Well, the spread I've chosen is the dragon spread. In Chinese culture, a dragon is good. It's not like here with George and the dragon, dragons eating virgins. It's nothing like that. The dragon is good. He helps the Chinese. He brings the wind. He's very beneficial to everybody. And in the story, you see him early on in the story helping the rabbit cross the river. The rabbit's having a lot of trouble, doesn't want to get wet. He jumps on a log. The log's a bit static, so the dragon creates a wind to help the rabbit cross the river. And then he comes next. And in my picture, he's flying across the landscape. It's kind of aerial shot of the river and the green hills.
What strikes us is, this very bold, almost flat colour, but quite a lot of texture. You use a lot of dots for texture and repeated lines that give a pattern there. I always thought it was quite hard to achieve that flat effect, but you say not so difficult.
No, it's not so difficult. I put in movement and texture, I think, when I need it. So there's the odd splash of the waterfall hitting the water. So I use lots of dots. But I was looking at a lot of Chinese art as well, and I was thinking of lots of traditional Chinese pictures I've seen. So definitely that was in the back of my mind. And Chinese pagodas and drum bridges crossing the river.
When you start working on something like this, where do you start?
What did I do? I did a very rough sketch of what I wanted to do. I wanted to show the many layers of a landscape, so I think I started with the sky and then started drawing in the hills and remembering the dragon's got to come in. I wanted the dragon to fill the whole space. He's such an important animal. And I had the river winding around the landscape. And these are the kind of landscapes I saw, really. They were, it's kind of as I have them in my memory.
Because they are painted, what happens if, I'm going to use the word mistake, but what happens if you're almost at the end of completing something like this, and then something you're not expecting happens to the painting? Do you start again, or what happens?
Well, I try not to see anything as a mistake. It's a kind of fortunate happening. And I work with it if I can. I mean, so far so good. And there's always a good designer I can work with, I hope. Because my pictures sometimes they do grow. They're always slightly bigger or smaller than the page I'm allotted. So I like it to develop as a painting, really. That's really what I think of. I remember there's got to be some type somewhere, so I normally leave some empty sky for that.
It's interesting hearing you say, you see it as a painting, which it obviously is, and you do paint as well. Is there a difference for you between painting and being an illustrator?
The difference is just really the usage, I think. That, if I do a painting for a book, I've got to be aware that there's going to be a gutter down the middle where the book folds, and there's got to be some space for type. But in general, I try not to make any massive differences.
You've talked a bit about your travels and how that's informed and inspired your work. I wondered whether, in terms of art, artists, folk art, are there any of those sorts of things that have really influenced you as well?
I really do look at a lot of folk art and outsider art. There's a lot to be seen. And when I travel, I look around galleries, and if there's a collection to be seen somewhere, I'll try and find it. But textiles, I'm passionate about. I try and collect things. When I travel, when I come back, I always have about twice as much luggage as when I started. So, full of textiles and books and materials and stuff I find in the street. Bags of things that I, put into my scrapbooks. But textiles very inspiring. In China, the folk art is really amazing. Incredible use of colour and almost Matisse-like collages you see in places.
Just looking at your spread of the dragon here, you could see how so much of this could translate into a wonderful textile as well. These patterns of the hills would be wonderful. These rice fields would, this dragon pattern would just be wonderful on fabric. And I think you are involved in a textiles project, aren't you?
Yeah, just my first textile project, and it's to do with, I'm not really supposed to talk about it, but it's going to be launched in September, and it's huge fabrics to do with different places in the world. So I think I've got 4 cities or 4 places. We've done a couple of rugs as well, and I like carpets and rugs.
I was going to ask you specifically about the writing of The Great Race, and what came first for you, the text or the image, and whether you find it as easy to work with the text as you do with the paintings.
For me, I see it mostly, it's a picture book with a little story, and primarily yes, I can write, but my writing is very simple, very basic, and what I love doing most is the drawing and the painting. And I hope the story, like having a good designer, you need a good editor to make it work. So I rely heavily on my editors and my designers.
You haven't gone over to the world of the digital yet. No. What is it that painting can give you that perhaps working with the digital form can't?
Yeah, I'm very old-fashioned, very traditional. I really love colour. I love paint. I love paint in tubes. I don't like paint on screens. It's just there's something so tactile and so magical about it. So something happens when you make a big sweep of red paint, and just the way colours mix. You never know what they're going to do, and I'm very happy when they just when they start doing things that I hadn't planned. That to me is the kind of magic. And I don't rely on electricity to make my pictures. Electric light maybe, but I don't want a screen or anything getting in the way. It's for me, it's very physical, I think.
I mean, colour mixing, it sounds as though it would be such an easy thing to do, but if you're actually having to make your colour in a book, you have to, for instance, this wonderful, I don't know what we would call this, it's like a lapis lazuli colour.
Aquamarine.
Yes.
Blue green sky.
So if you want to keep that consistent through the book, is that quite you're probably so well practiced in doing it now, but actually making the same colour every time, is that a challenge?
It's not. I mean, but I like, throughout the book, I like the colours to change page to page, just to get across the idea of the different times of day. And I often put the sun and the moon in my pictures. So and they change as well. So there's always, I'm thinking about the light changing through the day.
And obviously our listeners are mainly teachers and student teachers, librarians. You've worked with older students, so you've taught older students. What are the particular challenges of teaching young students today?
Now, what I like to do is go out in the street and draw, get outside and draw. And I think these days it's just becoming sort of historic, really. The act of going out to draw. A lot of students, I find, they want to just stay in the studio and draw on a tablet, draw, if I take students out to draw in the street, in the city, they'll take a picture on their phone and then they draw from what they see on the phone. But, I'm saying, look at what's in front of you. Just look at what's happening. And when I go out to draw, I like the kind of surprises that come along. You never know what's going to come down the street or who's going to come by. And there's something very surprising and kind of wonderful about that, and that's what I try to get across with when I take students out to draw. It's about making the most of what you see in front of you and being prepared for looking for the surprises.
More dynamic that way as well, I would think. And do you find that they also have a more limited range of tools that they might employ, or is it perhaps it's more true to say a different range of tools?
As a student, for me, I think what I tried to do in my time of 7 years was just try different things all the time, draw with different materials, try different paper. So much if you mix up 2 different kinds of paints, funny things happen that you just can't predict. And for me, it's about surprising yourself all the time, really. So I try and get students to draw with different kind of tools, unusual tools, toothbrush, or draw with your other hand. Or I remember my very first day in art school, foundation course. I was 17, and we were taken into a big room. There were about 60 students. And we were given drawing boards and paper and a pencil. And the tutor turned all the lights off, so it's completely black. And they said, OK, draw yourself. You've got half an hour. And you could see nothing at all. And it was a shock. But it kind of opened my mind to the fact that drawing is really about surprises. And you do know a lot, really. You know, I know what my face is like. And even in the dark, I can make some kind of representation. But what's going to come out in drawing in the dark is going to be a surprise. And that's really what you want. I think you want to surprise yourself, and then hopefully you'll surprise the people who see it.
There's obviously some good advice within that for teachers working with younger children as well. Is there any specific advice that you might offer to teachers who might not necessarily be art specialists, but if you were going to give them one kind of nugget of what they could do in the classroom, what would it be?
Well, I think the way children draw, and I look at a lot of children's drawings for inspiration, really. They just draw so spontaneously, and they are surprising because you say draw a car, and some kids will draw the underside of the car, or they'll draw the inside of the car when you're not really expecting it. They'll show you something they're particularly interested in. And I think it's that kind of thing, that sort of vision, that way of looking, which you really need to treasure. Kids, when they're very young, they're so spontaneous, and somehow it can get driven out, which is, I remember for myself, what is just so exciting when you go out and draw on the street, that thrill of the surprise. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's what really needs to be maintained with children's drawings, children's art. Mm-hmm. They are so, Picasso said, it's taken me all this time, 80 years, to get back to being a child, really.
I think that's so important, that it's about valuing them for who they are now, and not what they might be or become, and being driven too much by that.
Yeah, and it's not about making a copy of something. It's not about drawing a shiny new car. It's about show me the underside of the car, show me the back of the car, show me the whole thing, as colourful as you can.
I perhaps want to end just by thinking about the emotions and art. And I know that when I look at one of your books, I can't help feel anything but joyful. I think it is primarily your use of colour, and I just open it and I feel happy. So I just wonder, as an artist, when you're creating something like this, how do you feel? What are the emotions that you experience?
Joy is good. I mean, I'm very, I'm kind of aggressively optimistic, I think, about life, and these days it's so important. I find colour so liberating and so exciting, and I hope, that's really what I want to get across. A story like The Great Race needs to be, it's a joyful story, it's a funny story, and it's life-affirming. So those are the kind of values I kind of want to get across, really, and a love of the world, really. The world we live in is so special, and so much to be gained from other cultures, and, that's something I'm really passionate about.
Christopher, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been a real insight, and I've learnt so much, so thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Thanks so much.